We've been at our house about a month now, and I knew one thing I wanted to do was open up our living room. We have our main living room where the wood stove is, and then we have this other room that shoots off of it, and it's kind of closed off, and we pretty much haven't used it since we moved in. So in this video, I go over the process of doing this and transform our living room to this. Much more open, the heat from the wood stove circulates much better, and we get to use this space, which was otherwise not used to its potential. So my first step in doing this was to remove the trim around the area I was opening up. This is probably the easiest part. You just use a pry bar and a hammer and it comes off really easily. Next is to determine if the wall is structural or not. This is a pretty important part. The part I was removing was not. I knew this because the wall had sliding pocket doors inside the wall. This is also the time to determine if there's any wires running through the wall. Fortunately for me, there wasn't, but in my old house, I did have an outlet in the wall I did this to. I combated that by just shutting off the breaker, cutting the wires, wire nutting them, and then I placed them in a junction box that I put above the opening. I don't know if that's the right way to do it. I'm not an electrician, but I did that 10 years ago and the house hasn't burned down. So that's good. But if you're not comfortable with electric, definitely call an electrician for that. After taking some measurements, it was time to start demoing the wall. I used a utility knife to score the pieces so I could take them out in manageable sized pieces and try to make the least mess as possible, but that's pretty much impossible when you're demoing drywall. It is super dusty. But my son Cam had a lot of fun with this part. So at this point here, had I known, I should have just stopped right here, left that drywall on top, and trimmed it out. But I wanted to see what was behind the drywall because I originally wanted to remove all of this to open it right up. But by the time I got that top drywall off, I found out it was a structural header that was above the pocket doors that were there. So I definitely was not going to remove that. I could have put in a larger header to span more size, but for the little bit it would have gained me, I figured it wasn't worth it. So after a little cleaning up, I was off to Home Depot to get some drywall. So being someone that has really never done much drywall, I started just cutting and putting up pieces, trying to get the seams as tight as possible to make the mudding part easier. I also had a little bee join me, but it didn't end well for him. Leave that fucker right there. I went all around the opening. I then used paper back corner bead on the corners, which was held in place by spray adhesive prior to mudding. Then it was on to the mudding and taping process. This wasn't too bad either. Basically put some mud over the seams, tape over that mud, and then mud over that tape. Then I also covered any screw holes or dents along the opening as well. The absolute worst part about this was sanding. Not only just the sanding part, but the mess that came along with it. So at this point, my fiance was not impressed with all the dust in the house, and I pretty much was ready for any excuse not to mud and sand anymore. So what do you think a woodworker does when he doesn't want to drywall? I trimmed it with wood. So if you've seen the beams in my living room throughout the video so far, I kind of wanted it to tie in with that. We have hand-hewn beams on the ceiling in there, and I really wanted to match that rustic look. So at Home Depot, I bought these super cheap utility boards. They were only $5 a piece, and the rough look and saw marks were already intact on them, so I didn't have to do anything there. And for $5 a board, you just really couldn't beat that. So I roughly cut them down to size. I planed one side so that it could go cleanly against the drywall. This, you definitely don't need to do this step. I just did it because I have a planer. I then used some stain to try to come up with a color that would tie in with the existing beams. So I lightly put a gray stain color on, and then I put a special walnut stain on top of that, and was pretty pleased with the color. The stain really allowed the saw marks to show through, giving it that perfect rustic look. And the gray stain was actually a custom stain I mixed up for the walls in my garage that you can see behind me here. Hey, if you guys are enjoying the video so far, I'd appreciate a thumbs up on the video and subscribe for more. So my intent with putting this wood up was to make it look like beams pretty much. So I put the upright boards on first before the horizontal beam, to kind of make it look like the vertical boards are holding up the top board. I used a little bit of Loctite power grab and then just brad nailed it to the studs with 2-inch brad nails. Unfortunately, these utility boards only come in 8-foot lengths, and I had to span pretty close to 16 feet. So there's a seam in the middle, but it's not really noticeable unless you're looking right at it. Last step was to trim the inside of the opening. For this, I ripped down 2 boards to 6 1/4 width. I then raised my saw blade on the table saw, and I resawed the 2 boards in half, which gives me 4 thin boards. I then planed one side of each of those boards down so they were pretty thin. These thinner boards were going to make the seam a lot less noticeable, but this is not a step you need to do. You definitely don't need a planer to do this project. I stained those pieces the same color, obviously, and then put them in place. I mixed up a little wood glue and sawdust mixture to fill any of the seams. There was a couple noticeable ones when you first walked in the house, so I wanted to hide that a little bit. I then threw on a coat of paint around on the drywall. And pretty much called this project done. I still have a little bit of touching up to do on this side, and I gotta paint it, but I'm pretty pleased at how this project came out. It ties in with the existing beams perfectly and opens up our living room beautifully. I've got a lot more projects coming up, so be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.